I'll introduce our guests. To my far right, your far left, we've got Boontje, a London-based Dutch designer who set up his studio 20 years ago, and I think he designed your first piece for Habitat in 2002. The iconic garland light is still in production and features in the permanent collections of MoMA in New York and the V&A here in London. And in the course of his career, Tord has worked for brands including Swarovski, Kvadrat, Moroso, and Azatsa. His design reunion product, and there should be a slide of it just here, is the bouquet pendant light. Beside Tord is Claire Norcross, a lighting designer and former head of lighting at Habitat. She's an award-winning designer known for her sculptural creations and now runs her company, which she co-founded in 2011. It's called Luminosity, and Claire's design reunion product is the crystalline pendant light. Next to me is Sarah Campbell, who's known for her vibrant painterly patterns that she's created for everyone from Liberty to Yves Saint Laurent. She established the textile company Campbell with her sister Susan in the 1960s and has been designing for Habitat for over 30 years.
200 years?
200 years. For Design Reunion, Sarah has designed the 50 Leaves rug. To my left is Probyn, who was the tabletop design manager for Habitat for 5 years and has created some of its most popular tableware items. His minimalist designs have reached a global market, and he was recently named one of Dwell magazine's Rising Stars of 2014. Today, Aaron has his own studio where he designs for the likes of Tom Dixon and Norman Copenhagen. For Design Reunion, Aaron has designed two pieces, the Smithfield armchair and the Tessellate wall light. Simon Pengelly is an award-winning designer, another award-winning designer, who went from making furniture in his father's workshop as a teenager to becoming one of Britain's most respected and prolific designers, working for brands such as Arper, Foscarini, and of course Habitat. His Radius furniture range for Habitat was designed in 1999 and remains part of its core collections. It's one of the best sellers, as Polly was saying, and it is one of my favourite Habitat collections of all time. His design reunion product is the wing dining table. And last but certainly not least is Habitat's creative director, Polly Dickens, who joined Habitat in 2012 after working for some of the biggest names in homeware in the United States and here in Britain. And she's also the curator of Design Reunion. So here we go. We'll start with a quote by Peter Tchaikovsky, the Russian composer, who said, "Inspiration is a guest that does not willingly visit the lazy." And with this in mind, I'd like to ask you how conscious you are as designers in looking for inspiration. And Sarah, if we can maybe start with you. When we spoke before, you'd said, as a designer, you're always on the lookout for inspiration, whether you want them or not. You do breathe them in. That's an inspiration, an intake of breath, which I thought was a beautiful idea. So how conscious are you of looking for inspiration?
I'm always nervous of the word inspiration, I have to say. And I sort of think of it as ideas. And ideas come to you by magic. I don't know how. I think it is an intake of breath. Things come to me and come alive for me. I could be anywhere. A bus is a jolly good spot. And I don't seek it, but I respond to many things, I think.
So presumably you've never felt the need to go out and actually find it. There's never been a lack of inspiration.
I haven't got up one day and on my list is go and look for inspiration. No.
But would any of the other designers relate to that and think, actually, I have gone out looking for inspiration?
I think sometimes I feel that it's kind of, that I have to sort of flick a switch and turn my eyes on to a certain way of looking, a certain awareness. But generally I think it is about just being aware on the moment, like as you say, being on the bus, being wherever, but just showing that awareness and having that connection and making those connections and associations around you. So, yeah.
You know, Simon, for you, are there certain things that you know will actually be a rich resource of inspiration that you think, I'm going to go and do that today because I've got some projects coming up? And
same as these guys, it can come in any way, and often I find that actually if you're feeling the need to search for inspiration, actually the best thing to do is not, because in some ways you just end up just going sort of nowhere with it. I think it's
so it's a much more natural process rather than an automatic process rather than.
Yes, I'd say it is.
Is that something that you
Absolutely, I think it's sort of like feeling very instinctive. I mean, I don't know, when I get briefs with a project, I sort of there's something in the back of my head where I know where it should be going to, and I mean I do look around, but I think I genuinely sort of like form my own opinion before I start looking around.
Yeah.
I think it's I don't really sort of drawing too much from other people.
Yeah.
So.
Polly, for you, would it be a bit more structured? Because rather than thinking of design, thinking of specific products, you're needing to think of the macro, of a collection, of a direction.
Yes, I'm usually trying to provide inspiration for my design team.
Yeah.
So I'm quite often the starting point for that inspiration. So I suppose I'm looking all the time. You know, I'm looking wherever I go, and I'm not thinking about anything specific. But I'm always looking, and wherever I go, I'm lucky because I travel a lot. You know, I go and see a lot of different things, and so I feel like my mind's just like this filter, and it just gathers and gathers stuff. My iPad gathers a lot of stuff for me as well, and then when it comes to the sort of spitting out of the idea or the start point, I usually find that hidden in there somewhere is a bank that I can give, and it's usually already somewhere inside.
I'm glad you mentioned the iPad, actually, because one of the things I wanted to talk about was technology and how so many of you started your careers at different stages, as I mentioned earlier.
Can I just, when I started art school, I remember very clearly there was a very good teacher of mine, and he said, a project never starts with looking at a blank sheet of paper sitting at your desk. You have to go out, you have to go into the world and look at things. And for me, that's something I remember very clearly, and actually, although you don't actually go out looking for inspiration, you go out looking for information.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's very specific.
Yeah.
And that is something that you do consciously,
Oh,
though.
absolutely, yeah.
But I
It's
think
not a
we're all
byproduct of your life.
No, so like now we work on a project which is about coral galleries, and I go to aquariums and see as many books about corals as possible, and try and become an expert in coral. Yeah, for sure.
Actually, on that note, there's a fantastic product at the 10th design exhibition over from acclaimed at the moment by Jake Phipps, who's done a new cabinet which is encrusted with gold and corals that he's taken from casts from the archive of the V&A, so that might be something inspiring for you to go and see. Talking about technology and how you've all really entered your careers at different stages. So you've been working from the 60s. Aaron and Claire, I think you might be more regarded as 21st century designers starting your careers, or thereabouts on the cusp of the 21st century. So in this time, the processes of design and production have changed a lot, but have the processes of finding inspiration changed as well? Have Pinterest and Google Images really changed the way, it's gotten in the way or not necessitated the need for you to get out there and see things?
It's great to have all of this stimuli, but actually it's about going out, as Tor was saying, and just experiencing stuff. I think we're all inquisitive, naturally inquisitive people. I mean, I'll be the only one in a restaurant looking underneath the table to see how it's put together. You know, it's for me I just do that sort of thing. You just want to look.
Yeah. And Claire, when we spoke before, I remember you saying that you would go for a walk in the woods.
Yeah,
and it could never replace the.
No, and I think it's kind of walking down a country lane and having that experience of being somewhere else or maybe looking at how materials go together. And I think for me, it's the whole. I think products. We are three-dimensional design. I'm a three-dimensional designer, and I can't look at two-dimensional things.
You'll never get a sense of structure that way.
I want to get under it. And also you're only with those you're with the image sort of banks. Although they are fantastic sort of reminders, you don't get that 3- and 4-dimensional experience of how you felt when you looked at that object.
Or touched it.
And how you kind of. How was it comfortable? Was it and how it made you kind of feel emotionally or whatever? And I think it's I think although they are great resources, you can't be sort of.
But perhaps more research tools once you've got your starting point. Yeah. That's what I find my team do. That they get the germ of an idea, and then they're delving out there in the web and Google and blogs and things. But the first idea doesn't necessarily come from that place.
I think for a generation of younger designers who are very often glued to a screen, I think it's really good advice to actually get out there. How this can never replace a greater experience.
Yeah.
And for you, Sarah?
Well, what you say is right. I think it's full of, what's it called, the web thing, is full of information. Whatever it is.
Worldwide.
That's it, thank you. In Yellow Pages. It's full of information. Sorry. But it does nothing to that, or the size, or the scale, or the feel, or the smell, or the texture, or just your reaction because you're who you are. It just gets in the way, I think. But if you want to know how the name John Smith is written on the umbrella shop, it's a great place to look. Yes.
Tor, is there anything else that you wanted to add to this? What we've got now is a series of slides of examples of really a series of befores and afters where our designers are showing us what their initial inspiration was for design alongside the finished product. So we're going to start with a shot of Claire's.
Yeah, so these, I did a residency in Australia in 2001, and I came across the Banksia tree, and I was initially drawn to it because of my 850 light was sort of more based on corals, but the flowers of the Banksia tree are these sort of bottle brush, really bright colours. And then, but I also saw the pine cones as well, and I just really loved the sort of little openings that they have for the seeds. And my inspiration is always quite sort of centred around natural objects, kind of plants, and sort of looking at that geometric form. And so I was working. We decided to grow our collection of luminosity with the paper. So it was looking at techniques with just really simple pop-up techniques, and then kind of sort of faceting. So they kept it sort of quite urban, but within that scale, and hopefully you can still see the reference.
So what's your first step when you've got the pine cone?
Yeah.
What do you do? Do you draw? Is this done on a computer?
No, it's kind of made, I think, in a way. It's all, I do draw, and I think drawing for me is a way of getting my eye in, I suppose, heightening my sense of observation, I think, more than anything. But actually sort of I make because I'm not really sort of officially trained in kind of structure, so my process is very sort of intuitive, really, with that kind of technical structure, even though they have ended up being quite technical objects.
How long did it take you to get from that pine cone to the finished light?
Not long at all, really, in that sense. Maybe a week or so.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it was just fine-tuning it from that point on.
This is a good point. Just say there'll be questions at the end, but if at any point, particularly when the designers are talking about their work with their slides, if you've got any questions, raise your hand or cough loudly if I'm not looking, and we'll make sure you get your question in. If we look at the next one, which is Aaron's.
Yeah, my starting point for this was, it was actually, it actually came from a book, and it was for a culinary exhibition that was in Italy in the sort of mid-90s, and one of the sort of like first paragraphs in the book is sort of chronological order of how man sort of like started first using tools to the sort of like refined tools that we use today. And so the first starting point was a flint, and I think if you can see these images on the right hand side, I was really sort of like interested in how they were sort of like breaking off the flints and sort of like create these sort of like sharp facets. When I found this sort of like lead, I didn't really know where to take it, and I sat in front of my computer for a few weeks, and I was pretty sort of much drawing blanks on it. And I then decided that I would actually go over to a workshop and actually sort of like start physically making some things. And funnily enough, I then visited the bathroom, and they had like a toilet flush, and it had like this really beautiful sort of like angular facet to the top surface. And I then went back to the workshop and started playing around with a belt sander, and it just naturally sort of came, and it's like where the back of the hand was much wider and it sort of slimmed to the front, and it just sort of instinctively felt right, and it wasn't overtly ergonomic, which isn't right for an object like this, because you need to sort of be playing, or you need to sort of manipulate how you're using an object like this. And then like probably the later influence was actually came from like a samurai sword, which is obviously it's like quite a brutal weapon, but actually if you look at them, they're very, very sort of sculptural. and the ends of the knives are actually sort of like very blunt, and they sort of take the aggressiveness out of the knife, and I sort of wanted to put that into this knife as well, and I think by sort of like blunting the front, it sort of makes like the trajectory sort of like downwards instead of forwards, and so. And that's sort of.
I should point out, I did ask Aaron to go and take a photograph of the toilet flush, which helped inspire. There was a problem there, wasn't there?
Well, no, I mean it wasn't there. It's been, the building's been refurbished and everything's gone. So
sorry to let it down.
So you can get your inspiration in the lab.
Yeah,
many great minds have. We'll go on now to Simon's.
Well, this is the Theo chair. And we were asked to design a chair for churches. Not being at all religious, I kind of thought, oh God, that's not going to be very easy. But actually, what we started to do was research and go and visit churches, just to see how they're used, how they make you feel. And churches are very often, whether you're religious or not, very inspirational, spiritual places that kind of put you in your place in a nice kind of way. They remind you of your kind of place on the earth, and it's quite humbling in most cases. So as a starting point, it was very much sort of looking at the chair as not overpowering the environment that it was going into, and being quiet in that respect. But more importantly, the way churches are now used is not just on Sunday. It's throughout the whole week for children's creches, recitals, community groups. So the spaces need to be very, very flexible. So therefore, the brief became very, very, very tight and very difficult, because it had to be lightweight. It had to be easy to stack, easy to link, easy to clear away. Because actually, most of the people that use churches and work in churches are more often than not elderly. So the need for a very lightweight chair was important. And therefore, then that started to suggest, okay, well, we need to use a certain technology, because the way to get strength into a lightweight chair is to laminate it. And all of these sort of knock-on things, in terms of understanding how the space is used, is the inspiration.
So the purpose and the end use rather than an aesthetic quality.
Absolutely. Although the aesthetic quality is incredibly important, because the materiality and how that relates to a church, how that makes people feel, their expectation. They're not necessarily going to want a metal chair. It doesn't in some ways fit. Even if it's a very modern church, there is a sort of an expectation of history, heritage.
And you've spoken before about quiet design,
yeah,
and which is something that you try to achieve. And I think in this particular environment, it's incredibly appropriate as well.
Incredibly, because it's not about the personality of the designer, or what's important is making people feel comfortable.
So do you know how many churches this has been used in, or was it a one-off project?
Oh no, it's now we're in 3 or 4 cathedrals, lots of small churches. It's doing quite well.
And you've had great feedback on it.
Yeah. It just makes people feel comfortable in their environment.
Did you do anything to prevent the noise being made?
Yeah, we have. I mean, as a project,
it's the first thing I thought when I saw it.
Well, it's so light. Yeah. Even if you did move it,
yeah,
it doesn't make a noise. But
kisses the floor.
Yeah, touches the floor, touches the ground lightly. As I like to say.
Our next slide is. We've got another of yours.
Yeah. Well, this is
something we'll all be able to identify with.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a bit OCD about things on tables. Pepper rings and mess. And when we were asked to design the pepper mill, there wasn't a requirement for any particular function, just a pepper grinder, an electric battery-powered pepper grinder. So I kind of thought, well, this is an opportunity to design something that doesn't leave pepper on tables, because it really annoys me. And I also like the way that it's used. Quite often it's two-handed, and if you're cooking and stirring something, that's actually, yeah. So that in a way dictated the aesthetics, because it needed to be something that you could operate one-handed. But also it needs to be obvious, it needs to be explicit in terms of how you use it. You know instinctively that you have to squeeze. And then that expresses the bottom, which also, as you squeeze it, starts the motor and the grinding. And when you let go, it stops. So as it lets go, it closes. Yeah.
So who is this for?
This is for Joseph and Joseph,
Okay.
the British brand.
Excellent. I think we've got one towards now.
On the right, you have Blossom Chandelier, which I designed for Swarovski crystal. And they asked me to design a chandelier in crystal, and at the moment chandeliers are very much like things you saw in bank lobbies and most unromantic places at all. And my objective was very much to bring this kind of sense of romanticism back into crystal, into chandeliers. And first of all, you see crystal, and it's such a weird material. The first second you see it, you go like, wow, fantastic, and then immediately other reactions like, horrible, so too glitzy and too glossy and quite tacky. But then by playing around it, I started to see that these crystal shape resembles kind of flower petals. And then I remembered when I was very young in Holland, we had an ice storm, in early spring, and kind of all the trees and flowers were covered in this layer of ice. And it was very much like the same kind of sparkle that the crystal has. And I thought, yeah, if you put these crystals together like this and make this frozen branch of a cherry tree or something, that became the Blossom Chandelier.
So this is something which is much more aesthetically driven in terms of inspiration.
Yes,
To capture a moment, a particular idea.
Yeah. And it was going back a long time in memory. Yeah.
Stored up.
Yeah, and I still have a good memory.
The last slide we have here. Oh no, we have another yours again.
Okay. So this was here's a textile curtain I designed for Quadrant. It's called the Shadow Fabric. And then we have a film still from Hitchcock. Hitchcock is one of my favorite artists ever. And this film, Rebecca, is a black and white film, and it's filled with shadows, the whole film. And he's really bringing the garden inside this enormous big house through the shadows. But you also have this eerie feeling there's always somebody out there behind the curtains. And this sense of, on one hand, it's very romantic, at the other hand, it's also quite creepy and sinister what's going on. I like that a lot. So I try and combine that. So from that came to the idea, you could actually use digital printing on textile, which then was a very new thing. You can print so much kind of gradation and nuance in Greytow, in the printing, which you can't really do with screen printing because you need so many different screens to get that very subtle effect of the shadows almost not there in some parts. So then this became a hand drawing that I then scanned and then Photoshop kind of faded away and blurred until it was the right mix between the visible and invisible.
And what does the finished part, the textile, what does that tend to be used for?
The curtain.
It's
curtain. Yeah. I mean, I use it as a shower curtain as well.
Yeah.
It's like a double Hitchcock.
And what with the knife for you?
Yes, I'm scared.
We've got one more slide here. Sarah, we've got some. Talk us through what we're looking at here.
Oh yes. Well, that dress, I think I bought in about 1970 or something like that, and it's an Afghan robe, and it's traditional ikat mainly, and the top of it and the bottom and the trims are made of appliques, all sorts of fabrics and embroideries and little squares and triangles, and it really it's like a whole textile culture in one. It is the country, and it's lovely in many, many ways, and one of the many ways is that you see the hand. You know the hand that made it, or the hands that have made it, and that is very touching and always wonderful. And it's really just been a source of many different sorts of patterns for us and for me. And that was a furnishing fabric that comes from...
This is the central...
The central, that central bit there, comes from the play of diamonds on the bottom trim, you can't really see it. And then it was developed into a dress fabric, that was for Jaeger.
Was it altered at that point, or is it really the same? pattern that's on the furniture
I think,
fabric?
no, it's a different pattern. We repainted them lots of times in different ways, actually, for whatever the use was. And then we did a shawl, more or less that square, and then that was a record cover many years later, just the other year. And it's been used for lots of different things. I think one of the things that's lovely is that it's a sort of mine, a mine of inspiration, if you could say,
also,
for me.
with the record cover, I like that that your work has been a source of inspiration for other designers, the graphic designers who put that together.
That is rather
Did they pay you for it?
They did.
Good stuff.
They certainly did. So I think that's an instance again of something, well, from a long time ago, but that's remained rich and always new, even though it's old and I've seen it millions of times.
Thank you. Kind of following on from this idea of buying something and keeping it and using it as a mine for inspiration. Sarah and Aaron, when we spoke, you both used the same term, which was a mental library of inspirations, ideas that you have. But I wonder, and I'm sure you all identify with that, but do any of you have a more physical representation of this library? Do you keep boxes of cutouts? Do you have tear sheets? How do you store these ideas in some sort of physical way?
In the studio, there's stuff all over the place. Just material samples, boxes of this,
Meticulously filed.
No, actually, it's a total mess, and I can never find anything, if I'm totally honest. But it's the kind of act of storing it in some way stores it up there as well.
Holly, I imagine you're a bit of a collector.
I am, but I do have to restrict myself. I mean, I have to have an iron will, not to. My hand goes out and I want things, but I have to be careful because, as Simon says, you could fill a house. Yeah. Now I've got a bank of shelves in my kitchen, which seem to be able to just keep being able to find little space, but it can only be a certain kind of thing. So, I used to have boxes of tears. I mean, I used to live on magazines and tears and files of images, but now you don't need them anymore.
I think that's one thing with the internet, it's tear sheets that are less required.
You go onto your iCloud and there it is. Yeah. Millions of them.
And do either of you collect particular things, or do you have physical representations of these image banks?
Yeah, I collect loads of materials and many materials, I think. Sometimes you also have a bottle of water and you think, oh, this is a nice color, and you keep a cap or something.
Yeah.
And then when you move studio, then you...
What was that?
Now really seriously. Yeah, there's so much stuff. Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's just, I'm a big flea market charity shop.
Okay.
Kind of love a bit of a mood. Yeah. And just kind of, and I think that's, just kind of, but it can be just something you find on the street or a corner of a, I've kept things like billboards and stuff that have been ripped off because I like the pattern.
Would you consider yourself a bit of a hoarder?
Well, I mean, I used to have a market stall at Portobello many years ago, and I think I used to buy a lot of stuff and sell it, and it was a way of actually owning it for a moment of time, yeah. And but I suppose I got tired maybe of actually owning too much stuff, and so I sort of withdrawn from that a little bit. But I mean, my studio is full of stuff, full of samples, and I mean, I still go onto things like eBay now, and I buy like single glasses and things, and it's so yeah. I mean, I do collect things, and I think that, I mean, funny enough, sort of like eBay is such a sort of a great source of inspiration, really, for different colour combinations and different techniques and things. So yeah, and it's like, well, the world's biggest car boot sale.
Yeah.
And it's,
I suppose though, having too many things, I mean, you talk about limiting, apart from the practical nature of it, is it can actually, I imagine, clutter your mind and clutter, the valuable bits of information, inspiration. That
and the best thing you can do is edit.
Yeah.
Get rid of a whole load of stuff.
That's something that you do all the time.
Yes, and put things together in a different way, and suddenly that gives you a whole different take.